I've been telling the story of Bull, the inmate who was inappropriate towards me whenever I first arrived at High Desert State Prison. Somebody in the comments asked if this was Bull from Contra Costa County, and I wanted to make clear that not only is the person in my story not Bull from Contra Costa County, the person in my story, he wasn't actually named Bull. I'm using that handle as a fill-in because I don't feel comfortable using the guy's actual name. Yes, I know what was going on. He was a sexual predator and he was hoping for an opportunity to take advantage of me or probably anybody else. That said, there's not nearly enough evidence to go tossing this guy's name out on the internet with that accusation. That's not fair at all. I change a good number of the names or handles of people that I talk to, just because I talk about criminal stuff sometimes, and the last thing that I want to do is offend the wrong person. Gosh, maybe ruin the wrong person's life because I said something that happens to relate to a criminal case. As it turned out, Bull did eventually leave B-Yard at High Desert. His points dropped, and he went to, I think it was Delano, 6 months after the incidents that I described. He and I never really talked at length anymore. Maybe, hey, how you doing in the chow hall? Or he came by and asked if he could buy some apples from me, but that was the extent of it. In September of 2002, the end of September of 2002, maybe the beginning of August of 2002, I was trying to find a new Cellie. Blanky was upset. He was working with hurt feelings. He'd gotten the idea that I tried to leave the cell we were in without talking to him, that I'd planned on selling up with Bull and just sneaking away without letting Blanky find a new person to move in. This hadn't been my intent, but if I had done it, it would have been very rude, and I can understand why he was offended and why we were suddenly at odds. He became pretty passive-aggressive and difficult to deal with. I remember an occasion where he picked my bowl that I ate food out of my locker and set it in the sink, and then walked to his bunk and sat down. This is a very small thing. I mean, it's not going to take me 2 seconds to put the bowl back in my locker. But I asked him, hey, Blanky, why'd you do that? And he was very surly. He said, well, I'd say I won't do it again, but you're moving anyway, so what's the difference? There were little things like this that made it harder and harder to live with him. I had a clean white towel that I'd leave my boots on because it could get muddy or dirty at High Desert. And I'd always clean my boots off real good out in the day room and set them on the towel. I swear on one day, I came back to my cell whenever he'd been in there and my boots were filthy. And you just have to stop and ask, how much work does that take? Did you sneak the boots out to the yard? Or did you sneak dirt up to the cell? It's possible I just misremembered, but I have a pretty good memory, and he was acting weird and passive-aggressive, so no, he found some way to dirty my boots while they were in the cell, I think. These are just examples of why I was happy to be moving out of the cell once things got weird. Thankfully, I had an acquaintance downstairs on the lower tier, John, who his cellie was paroling in just 3 days. So all I had to do was maintain for 3 days, and it's a joke in prison. You say, I could do 3 days standing on my head. I couldn't literally do 3 days standing on my head, but I can certainly do 3 days with a passive-aggressive cellie who's maybe jay-catting out a little bit. I don't even think he was trying to be mean, like he was trying to pick a fight. I do think his feelings were hurt, and that this is just how he was lashing out. Regardless, whenever John Cellie paroled, I was standing at the door and excited to be getting the heck out of there. I'd talked to Officer Moore, and he'd said it would take about an hour to process the paperwork after John Cellie left to get me moved down to the cell. Cool. It wasn't 15 minutes. Not 15 minutes after John Cellie left, they moved a new guy in. And it wasn't just a new guy. He was about 60. He was stoop-shouldered, he had weird puffs of graying hair, and a tapping cane. He was blind. There was no way they were going to be moving this guy to the upper tier to where I lived so that I could move down into the bunk where he lived. that wasn't happening. They put this guy on a lower tier, lower bunk on purpose because he could fall and hurt himself otherwise. This meant that I was essentially screwed, and I was going to have to find somebody new to live with and play the Cellie lottery. You see, if you just ask, hey, I need to live someplace new, they're generally willing to accommodate you. The problem is that you're going to end up with somebody else who, for whatever reason, doesn't have people living with them. Maybe they're Cellie just paroled, no big deal, but maybe they're a drug addict, or they have hygiene problems, or they're an alcoholic who gets violent. Maybe they're a step away from killing their next Cellie. I mean, you don't know. It's a lottery. I missed an opportunity that last week or so that I was living in a cell with Blanky. You see, things got weird and bad, and I just let him stay that way because it was easier. It would have been awkward to sit down like adults and have a grown-up conversation about how I hadn't meant to offend him, and I actually kind of liked him. He was a good guy. Instead, I sat in that cell enduring weirdness from him, and I think he was pretty miserable too, because we didn't have that adult conversation. And you know, maybe adult and reasonable isn't the direction he was looking to take things. But I don't know. I can't know because I didn't try. Instead, I just left stuff weird. And he lived in the building for another 2 years after that before he ended up going SNY over drug debts. And I don't know that we talked 20 times in that time, and it was always pretty shallow. Hey, how you doing? How's your family? Whereas we'd lived together before that and been friends. In your life, whenever you find yourself in that situation where you just can't put up with somebody anymore, maybe they're not going to be your gambling addict Cellie who does weird things like move your bowl and put dirt in your boots. It might just be somebody who cuts you off in traffic, or your coworker who just can't get his job done right. Maybe it'll be your mother-in-law who thinks you can't get your job done right, is always telling you how to do it. Whoever it might be, before you snap, before you decide you just can't take another moment of it, take a moment. Think. Because whatever you say or do, whenever you just can't put up with any more, you may regret it whenever you realize you're going to have to put up with more. Because you're going to deal with your coworker again unless you're planning on getting a new job. And you're going to deal with your mother-in-law unless you're planning on getting a new spouse. You can put up with more because you just don't have a choice, and that's how it is in prison with a Cellie. It's one of the worst things about being in prison. They don't just put you in a cage, they put you in a cage with another guy. And it's the Cellie lottery. Maybe he's a good guy, maybe you get along. Maybe he's crazy and he's going to wake up at 2 in the morning thinking that you're somebody he hates. The choices you make in that environment, you are going to continue to pay for in that environment. So before you speak, before you act, before you decide you just can't take any more, maybe you can take just a little more. Take that moment and really think about what you want to do and who you want to be.